All right, welcome everyone to our presentation today. Thank you for joining us to talk about ticks and tick-borne pathogens and how to keep yourself safe in Ohio. And most of this information also can apply to the surrounding area. But before we get started, I just wanted to remind everyone of some protocols today. So importantly, we're going to ask that if folks have questions that they put them in the Q&A. So there's two ways to enter text in Zoom. One of them is the Q&A and one is the chat. And so we're only going to monitor the Q&A for questions. And please note that this is a live webinar with many hundreds of people signed on, and there is the option to post questions anonymously. So I know sometimes people would prefer to ask their questions privately, and in that case, please choose the anonymous option when you're posting to Q&A. And this webinar is going to be recorded and shared. So again, if you would prefer to ask your question anonymously, that would be another reason to do so. So I'm going to start things off talking a little bit about tick ecology and epidemiology, and then I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Tim McDermott. So we're each going to talk roughly 20 minutes, and we're going to then talk to you about some services available at OSU and then answer some of your questions at the end. So while you're welcome to put your questions in the Q&A as they come to you, we are going to wait until after Tim and I have finished our segments to then address those questions. Okay. All right. Right. So I am going to switch over to my presentation at this point in time. All right, Tim, are you seeing my primary slide there? Okay, well, we are ready to go. So protecting you, your family, and your animals from ticks. So I am a disease ecologist who focuses primarily on ticks and tick-borne disease. So it's my job today to talk to you about the what, the where, and the why of ticks and tick-borne pathogens in Ohio. And this is my contact information. And if you're on Twitter or X, you can find me and our lab's research at Risapezapane. So why are we talking about this today? Well, as many of you may know, and why you are attending today, it's because you sense that tick-borne disease has changed pretty dramatically in the past decade, and this is not unique to Ohio. This is something that has happened nationwide. And that has a lot to do with the range expansion, or the footprint of where these ticks are distributed has changed a lot in recent years. And of course, as those ticks have moved to new areas, they're bringing their pathogens along with them. And pathogens, you might hear that term a lot in this talk, and that's really, we're talking about the bacteria and the viruses and the parasites that they can transmit. Also, we've seen some changes in our seasons, and so there are shorter winters, longer summers, and more days of the year where more ticks can be actively seeking hosts and potentially encountering you. And we also have some new ticks that have been introduced to the United States, and there have been some new pathogens or illnesses that have emerged. And I want to stress how this is especially problematic in areas that didn't historically have a lot of awareness or a lot of concern for tick-borne disease. And we're going to talk about how that is the case in Ohio. But when that happens, there is not an existing infrastructure and awareness in the community, in society in those areas. So we don't have like generations already of people who are thinking about tick prevention and thinking about Lyme disease. We don't have physicians who've been seeing it, for their entire career kind of thing. And when tick-borne disease emerges in a new region, we often see kind of a lag in our ability to respond to that problem. And so Ohio has seen a little bit of that since this problem started emerging. So most of you are probably familiar with the American dog tick, and maybe 25 or so years ago, the American dog tick was probably the only tick that most people saw. And it was or is pretty ubiquitously distributed throughout Ohio. So it's found everywhere, so I just have it as this solid red state here. But about 25 or so years ago is when these ticks, different tick species in the United States really started expanding their distribution. And so what we've seen is this really strong northward expansion of the Lone Star tick. So this tick can now be found, technically encountered or found in almost any county in Ohio, but it's certainly concentrated and more abundant in the southern part of the state. The black-legged tick historically was found in the Northeast and the upper Midwest, but it's really been converging on the Ohio River Valley and sort of sandwiching Ohio and is now distributed throughout the state, which we're going to look at some more detailed maps later. But then new kids on the block, if you will, new ticks on the block is the Gulf Coast tick. And the Gulf Coast tick has really rapidly expanded across the US in the past 5 to 10 years. And in Ohio, they have been reported in a kind of a wide distribution of counties kind of sporadically, but are becoming established kind of in this southwestern edge of Ohio. And then we have the Asian longhorn tick, which is not native to North America and was introduced to the United States sometime, perhaps multiple times, between 2010 and 2017, and has been growing, moving across various parts of the United States since that time and into Ohio. So it's moving essentially westward across Ohio. So we really went from having one common medically important tick to having 6 medically important ticks if we include the brown dog tick. And I don't typically map the brown dog tick because it's not commonly a tick that you would encounter while walking around outdoors. It is strongly associated with dogs, and so it can be found in kennels and shelters and other types of facilities like that. So it will sometimes come up in Ohio, but it's not usually something that you would typically encounter. So we don't map it. But there has been this huge change in the number of ticks that we typically would worry about in Ohio over the past 25 years. And with these different ticks, of course, comes with a variety of different concerns. So this is my laundry list of potential illness outcomes from each of these different 6 medically important ticks. And importantly, these are significant to both humans and animals. So I have both on this list. And we typically think of these 3 as, we call them the big 3. And so throughout the United States, these are the 3 most commonly encountered ticks, and the same is true here in Ohio. So the American dog tick, which is responsible for Rocky Mountain spotted fever, the black-legged tick, which is the only tick that can transmit the agent of Lyme disease. But importantly, that's also significant for dogs and horses, and sometimes, rarely, cats. But it can also transmit anaplasmosis, babesiosis, Powassan virus in lower numbers. And the Lone Star tick. And that tick is responsible for human disease as well as canine disease. And importantly, mammalian meat allergy or alpha-gal syndrome. So today I'm going to highlight specifically Lyme disease. This is Lyme Disease Awareness Month, and it is the most common vector-borne disease. And I'm going to talk specifically about alpha-gal syndrome as well because of that significance. But importantly, this Asian longhorn tick, it's new to the United States. It's new to Ohio. We're still learning about the risks it poses. But this one is very significant for livestock health. So I will touch a little bit on that as well. So to make sure everyone is on the same page, we have to do a little bit of tick biology, just a brief summary of, so we can understand what different life stages are risky and why. So first of all, ticks have 4 different life stages. There's the egg, of course, and then they hatch as larvae. Then I call larvae baby ticks, and then they have the nymphal tick or the teenage tick and the adult tick. And it's only the adult that has a sex differentiation, so male versus female. And so if you see on the right-hand side of this page here, I want everyone to stop and look at their thumbnail and think about how tiny some of these ticks are, okay? So all 4 could fit on your thumbnail, and the larva is about the size of a period on a page, and the nymph is about the size of a sesame seed or a poppy seed. So it's extremely tiny, okay? But importantly, these ticks only feed just once per life stage. Okay, and they're going to feed for several days at a time. And as they feed, they're going to dramatically change in appearance. And that will be clear why that's significant in just a minute. Importantly, ticks do not fly. They don't jump. They don't fall from trees, actually. All ticks do is quest from low-lying vegetation. So basically questing is a process where they sit on the tip of vegetation and they have their little arms out with their little claws and they're essentially waiting, and then they'll brush onto fabric or onto your leg, and then that is how they find their host. And they're usually detecting CO2 as a stimulant to indicate that there's a tasty host nearby. And then after they've taken that one blood meal for each life stage, they actually go into diapause or dormancy. So you could think of this as like tick hibernation. Okay, so they're going to go and they're going to sleep, and that's when they're going to molt into the next life stage. And that takes some time. Usually it's over winter. But importantly, there are some species of ticks that are going to be active all year round. And so their activity periods are going to differ by life stage in some cases. But the reason that ticks are so good at what they do and hard for people to notice on the skin, it's not only because they're small, it's actually elegantly designed to be hard to detect, because ticks have special compounds in their saliva that help increase your blood flow and reduce that sensitivity that lets you know they're there. So there's anti-inflammatories and anticoagulants in that saliva. And you can imagine why that's important. I mean, this is, an arthropod that only takes one meal per life stage. And so it needs to have developed a very reliable way of doing that undetected. So as a tick feeds, you can see on the far left side here, this is our unfed black-legged tick. Many of you might recognize this black-legged tick with its rust-colored body, this classic image of the tick that transmits Lyme disease. But look how distinctively that color and shape changes as it feeds, right? So some people will say to me, oh, Dr. P, I'm sure it wasn't a black-legged tick because it was this big gray squishy tick, right? Okay, so we can see why that color can be really unreliable to determine your risk. So this is why we stress the importance of saving that tick and having it properly identified, because it can be very different in appearance than what you might see on a lot of materials. So I mentioned there was 4 different life stages if we include eggs. So and that they could live potentially a long time. They're overwintering. So let's look at this life cycle. So starting in the top right-hand side, we have the eggs that are laid, and then they're going to hatch into larvae or baby ticks. And larvae are generally uninfected. So there are some pathogens that can be vertically transmitted, from adult to offspring through the eggs. But it's very rare, and it's not the agent of Lyme disease. So when larvae hatch, they are uninfected. So they're lower risk than other life stages. But then they're going to take that first blood meal. And this is their first opportunity to become infected, especially if they're feeding on important hosts that might be infected with the bacteria that causes Lyme disease. So they have an opportunity to get infected at this stage, and then they're going to go into diapause or their resting period, and they're going to molt into a nymph. And they're going to emerge as a nymph, which is still very small. And they're going to have a second opportunity to take a blood meal. And at this time, they could bite a person. And if they were infected, they could transmit. Or they could bite another wildlife host and have another opportunity to become infected. Then they're going to go into that diapause and rest again, and they're going to emerge as an adult. And again, they will bite a host. And if they had become infected at either of those 2 previous time points, they could transmit the agent of Lyme disease at that time, or they could bite another wildlife host, and then they will lay eggs. Okay, and this whole process can take 2 years, sometimes even longer. So I mentioned that different life stages are active at different times a year, and the times can vary by different species, but let's look specifically at the black-legged tick, given its importance in public health. So here we see the adults, it's the blue line. So this is relative abundance. So doesn't mean that that's impossible to see some of these life stages at these other times of year, but you can see that the adults are most active in the winter. Okay, and so they've had 2 opportunities to become infected. So, for example, I talked to plenty of hunters at this time of year, trappers who might go out, and this is an opportunity where they might encounter adult black-legged ticks and become infected. And then there's the nymphs here in red. Now they start becoming active right now. Okay, so right now, and they stay active through the summer into early fall. They start to decline, but you can still find them into November. And the nymphs are most concerning or most often linked with cases of tick-borne disease because they have at least taken 1 blood meal, so they could be infected. And they are so incredibly small that it's very hard for people to notice them and remove them in a timely manner. And so transmission can happen. And they're also active at this time of year when more people are out being active and perhaps, wearing their sandals and their shorts in warm weather and things. And then we have in the midsummer into the fall, we have this boom of the larvae that are hatching from those eggs. So these adults that are active in the winter are going to lay those eggs, and then those eggs are going to hatch and become active and look for that first meal. So really importantly, I can't stress enough that you do have a risk, at least some risk, of Lyme disease year round because those adults are active in the winter. And they will be out questing or host seeking anytime that the ambient temperature, like the air temperature surrounding them, is above freezing. Okay, so this is a picture of a colleague of mine took out tick dragging on the snow, but it was about 50 degrees that day, and she got 12 adult black-legged ticks on this trail. Okay, so you absolutely do have a risk year round, but we typically see the most cases associated with this nymphal life stage. And that's because of their tiny size and because of the time of year. Most of the time in winter, people are probably wearing hopefully more layers and things of that sort. So if we were to look at what this looks like in time of onset in Ohio, you can see that most people are getting sick starting in June and July. And this accounts for that slight lag time. So if they were to become bitten by a nymph that emerged in May, it can take a few weeks before they're ill. And so we really see this boom in the summer of Lyme disease cases because that's associated with the activity of that nymphal black-legged tick. So I've only shown you the activity chart for one of these species, but if we were to stack all of the species of medically important ticks together, it would look something like this. Our black-legged ticks are year-round. Lone star ticks and American dog ticks are more concentrated during the summer. Asian longhorn ticks go a little bit longer in the year, but are, again, very active in the summer. And Gulf Coast ticks are one we're still studying in Ohio, and we do not yet know their entire activity period, but we know that they are active in summer months. So if we were to draw some lines here, basically your greatest period of risk for encountering ticks is going to be March through October. But importantly, also could be a risk year round. And of course, again, this really overlaps with the period of time that people are spending a lot of time outdoors and in fewer clothes, engaging and interacting with nature. So this is when, there's the greatest opportunity for tick bite to occur. So let's talk a little bit about the distribution of ticks in Ohio specifically in more detail. And importantly, the maps I'm going to show you today are available publicly on the ODH website. They are updated regularly. So if you want to take a minute and follow this QR code, that will take you to the page that you can find all of the maps that I'm showing you today, maps and the charts available. So as we get into tick distribution, I want to stress how there is not one singular tick habitat place, right? And no singular aspect that all ticks are the same. So they're going to be distributed differently by species. They're going to have different habitats. So for example, this habitat on the left, this tall grassy area that's very exposed to the sun without trees, this is a habitat that American dog ticks love. Some other ticks will use this space as well. Gulf Coast ticks like this space. But conversely, your black-legged tick does not like to be in open sun. So this habitat here with these tall trees and the shade and this leaf litter, this is where we find black-legged ticks. And Lone Star ticks will use both. They also have different host preferences by life stage as well. So this is a reason why you could get bitten by larval, nymphal, or adult black-legged ticks, but you'll only ever be bitten by an adult American dog tick. And that's because the juvenile life stages of that tick do not typically like to bite larger mammals at all. So they have different host preferences, different habitat preferences, and that can also dictate their distribution. And then they're going to have varying seasonal activity, like we've already talked about. Some of that also has implications for how long the life cycle is of these different species. And the most important piece is that these things mean that each of these species can transmit different diseases. Okay, so that's why knowing which tick bit you is really valuable. So I want to do a quick comparison since we've talked about these different ticks. These are just the adults, but you can see that unfed, they do have some pretty distinct differences. The American dog tick is the one that most people, again, have probably seen and encountered, perhaps as well the black-legged tick. But you'll see the Gulf Coast tick, which is new here in Ohio, actually looks pretty darn similar to the American dog tick. And this is partly why it has expanded so quickly, maybe without recognition for quite some time because of its similarities. And it requires a little bit more knowledge of tick anatomy in order to differentiate. It's really these mouth parts that make the big difference. The Lone Star tick is another one people are pretty familiar with, but what I always like to point out is most people know this as the tick that has the lone star on its back. That's where it got the name, nothing to do with Texas. But importantly, only the adult female has this star. The male does not, the nymph does not, the larvae does not. So people could misunderstand that that they might not realize they were bitten by a lone star tick, even though they were, just because it doesn't have this marking on its back. It easily could have been a male, a nymph, or a larvae, and all of them are happy to bite people. So where can you find these ticks? Well, the black-legged tick is pretty widely distributed through all of Ohio at this point. And again, this is the only tick that can transmit the agents of Lyme disease. It's also pretty significant for anaplasmosis, although cases of that are much lower than Lyme disease. But this tick is found throughout Ohio. The American dog tick, I mentioned similarly, was always found throughout Ohio. I'm sure it is established in these counties as well. We just have fewer submissions from those counties. And this tick has always been important for the agent of Rocky Mountain spotted fever. And that's a very serious tick-borne disease, although thankfully, because there is not a lot of infected ticks in nature, we don't see nearly as many cases as we might. The Lone Star tick I mentioned is most abundant in the southern half of the state, but can be found in almost any state or any county in Ohio. As you can see, there are northern counties where we know this tick is established. It transmits the agents of ehrlichiosis, and really importantly, is also associated with this mammalian meat allergy, which we're going to talk about. The Gulf Coast tick is one of our newest ticks, and it does transmit a pathogen that's important for people. It causes a spotted fever that is kind of similar to Rocky Mountain spotted fever, but usually less severe. And it also can impact livestock. It causes this swollen ear condition called Gotch ear. And the new exotic tick introduced to the United States is distributed in where we've detected is distributed on the eastern side of Ohio, moving central. And we do care a lot about this tick because it can reproduce asexually. So it can basically clone itself without having to mate. And that means it can feed in very large numbers and establish very large infestations on properties. And we do know that it's transmitting a serious pathogen to cattle. But even in absence of that pathogen, just the sheer numbers of ticks feeding can cause severe anemia. And interestingly, or concerningly, if you keep this distribution in mind and then look at the distribution of where most of our beef cattle inventory is in the state of Ohio, this is pretty concerning overlap because the areas where we have this tick are where we also do a lot of our cattle farming. This is just an example of what a cow infested with Asian longhorn ticks looks like. I'm gonna move ahead. So a little bit about Lyme disease. So in the state of Ohio, we first started detecting established populations of the black-legged tick in the year 2010. And it has continued to expand since that time. And this is a graph of human case counts every year on the this axis here, and then dog seropositive dog screenings on this axis over here. And you can see that humans and their companion animals are experiencing this mirrored trend over time that's showing this exponential increase in cases. So we had over 1,700 human cases last year in Ohio. And the CDC suggests that, because we know there are difficulties with counting cases and diagnostics, that probably the real burden is a factor of 10. So that would be something like 17,000 people. And importantly, since 2010, this data reflects a 47-fold increase in Lyme disease cases in humans since 2010. And Lyme disease is the most common of all vector-borne diseases in the United States, so more common than mosquito-borne disease. So again, here was our distribution. We do know that in some parts of Ohio, more than 60% of the black-legged ticks that we test can be infected with the agent of Lyme disease. So it can, even though this tick can be found all over Ohio, it is often most abundant, in other words, highest densities in the areas of Ohio where there is forest. So I want you to keep this image in mind as we look at this overlap with Lyme disease cases. Okay, so if you look at forest cover and Lyme disease cases, you remember these ticks really like that canopy. They don't like open habitat. So there certainly is a risk on the western side of Ohio as well. There are pockets where we have good black-legged tick habitat, but much more of the eastern side and southern part of Ohio is ideal habitat for this tick. And this is the Lyme disease case data by age and sex in Ohio over about a 10-year period. And I include this because I want to highlight this here, that you can see there's quite a distribution of ages. There's a bump in folks over 55, but really importantly, it's our kids. It's our kids who are getting Lyme disease. So age 5 to 14 make up the largest number or proportion of our Lyme disease cases in the state. And that's not unique to Ohio. That's often seen elsewhere as well. So some clinical signs. The reason I really like to point this out is that this quote unquote bullseye rash, or the Lyme disease rash called erythema migrans, looks very different on different people. Okay, so it's not always this bullseye with this nice central clearing. It may not even be especially round. So I like this chart from CDC because it shows you how variable this is. And only 60 to 80% of patients are ever going to see any kind of rash. So you don't have to see this rash to have Lyme disease. A lot of tick-borne disease is characterized by flu-like symptoms. So intermittent fatigue, chills, fever, headaches, these sorts of things are pretty common across the board for many tick-borne diseases. Importantly, if people can be treated with antibiotics in this early stage, most people do recover quickly and completely from Lyme disease. But it can become disseminated. So if you are not treated, you can see this rash spread to other parts of the body. You can start to get nervous system symptoms. You get more painful and swelling joints in other parts of the body. Sometimes people experience kind of brain fog symptoms, and very rarely Lyme carditis. And then at the late stage, this is where it's really gone untreated for a very long time. Some people can get neurological complaints, long-lasting arthritis, and this can lead to permanent damage And then there are also examples of post-treatment Lyme disease syndrome or chronic Lyme that can happen. So thankfully, many people at this late disseminated stage still do respond well to antibiotics, although we know that not everyone does. So importantly, in your pets, of course, can also get Lyme disease. We do see clinical disease most common in dogs, and even then, it's only estimated to be around 10% of dogs that become infected become clinical. But the most common sign that we typically see in dogs is kind of unexplained lameness, right? So we rule out other things. Sometimes we'll see fever, we'll see inflamed kidneys and things, and it can progress in some cases to Lyme nephritis. All right, so moving on to alpha-gal. So I always want to talk about alpha-gal because this is an emerging disease. It is not a reportable disease at this point. And what that means is that we don't really have a good mechanism for counting how many cases there are. But given what we do know, it is probably the second most common tick-borne illness following Lyme disease. So what is it? It is not caused by a pathogen. This is an allergic reaction that people have to mammalian meat and the products that are made from mammalian meat after being bitten by a Lone Star tick. And importantly, this is not just food products, okay? Some medications, cosmetics, even some vaccines, gelatins, milk products, things that contain products from mammals can trigger this reaction in people. And it has become the leading cause of adult onset allergy and anaphylaxis in the southern part of the United States and much of the eastern United States. So again, we don't have clear case counts in Ohio, but this is a map from the CDC, which is looking at the number of alpha-gal cases per 1 million per year. And you can see that in southern Ohio, where we have an abundance of Lone Star ticks, we have some pretty high numbers, like in other parts of the United States as well. And so in 2019, there was more than 35,000 clinical cases that were recorded. And that's probably a small fraction, like I said, because this is not reportable. So if we wanted to overlay this with where we find the Lone Star tick in the United States, you can see that there's pretty decent alignment. So this is the primary tick responsible for alpha-gal syndrome in the United States. Presentation of alpha-gal can really be highly variable, but it could involve any of these things, which can look a lot like other allergies as well. But rash, hives, gastrointestinal discomfort, it can lead to like strange drops in blood pressure, dizziness or faintness. And usually what's interesting about this allergy is that it's a delayed onset of this reaction. So it might happen 2 to 6 hours after exposure to a trigger, as opposed to like most allergies, which are pretty acute. So that's why in part it's difficult to diagnose. But I want to stress the public health importance of this because it's the severity of the allergy reaction. So 60% of people experience anaphylaxis, which can be life-threatening. And more than a third of them can have cardiac and respiratory symptoms as well. So that is why we talk about how much of a public health importance this illness is, even though it's not caused by a pathogen. So there is no specific treatment at this time. There's management of symptoms, but basically people have to make a lifestyle change. And again, this is not just diet. This is like special considerations for surgeries, special medications, special processes, like I said, cosmetics, all sorts of things depending on the severity of your allergy reaction, might have to change. And we don't entirely know all of the ins and outs of how this works with different people's immune systems, but some people, this condition can resolve on its own. But other people, it's lifelong. And one thing that the science does tell us is that the more Lone Star tick bites that you have in your life, the more likely the severity of the condition and the longevity of the condition. So preventing those tick bites can prevent this problem. So usually by now I have thoroughly kind of freaked people out about the outdoors, and I want to bring us back and reflect on how Overwhelmingly, the outdoors is extremely good for your health. We encourage everyone to get outside and utilize the outdoors. I do it all the time with my kids, but we're here today to talk to you about being smart while doing so. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to Dr. Tim McDermott, who's going to talk about how to keep you and your family safe.
Thanks, Risa. That was great stuff. Let me get mine up there. All right, you can see and it looks good. Good audio. All right, so for part 2 of keeping you, your family, and your animals tick safe, we're going to talk about exactly that. Let's get you started and hit slide 2. So how do we keep ourselves and our family members and our animals tick safe? One of the things that we have found as we are working in this space is it really takes an integrated pest management strategy to do that. There is no real silver bullet where we can just do one treatment and it makes everything go away. Although I will say companion animals come pretty close with the array of products that they have available to them. So what we're going to talk about a little bit is integrated pest management strategies in the environment and on your animals, and then how do we keep the people safe? And that strategy is going to be multi-pronged. It involves knowledge, developing that personal protective plan to keep you safe. Habitat modification is key. Wildlife exclusion, if you can do it, is going to be helpful. And then acaricides, which are pesticides that affect ticks. So Risa showed this slide, and I'm going to show you because this is where the knowledge comes in. If you know now that you can encounter a tick in about any habitat and in about any time of year, that is helpful knowledge, and that can guide some behaviors. So when you see this, we do commonly think of summer as really our most impactful time, but now you can actually encounter a tick in this time frame. This is literally Thanksgiving to December. And then if you're thinking to yourself, well, I don't got to worry about anything in spring, this is the time where we most commonly encounter the American dog tick. And so where do we encounter that? Pastures, meadows, hay fields, mown lawn grass. I've already talked to a number of people that have gotten American dog ticks on them because we're starting to mow our grass now all the time. So be mindful of that. And then, we have our deer tick spike of our nymphs and our larvae in the middle of summer here. If I'm in southern Ohio, I know that's my biggest risk for encountering a Lone Star tick, especially if I'm down. How can I treat my yard, or how do I deal with ticks in my yard? And it's really important that you understand a little bit about what's going on in there. And my internet's unstable. So what I'm going to do is I am going to shut my video down. Okay. In your basic backyard lawn grass, right in that sunny middle, really only about 2% of ticks are going to be in that space. Ticks spend about 90% of their time off the host, and where we encounter them the most is in that edge habitat, about 3 meters on either side of the transition from, say, the grass into the woods. So some of the habitat modifications that you can do would be dealing with that edge habitat. Maybe that is going to be some mulch, that is going to be clearing up leaf litter, that is going to be placing even a wall or a fence for wildlife exclusion. Controlling invasive plants is critical. We have seen higher percentages of ticks and things like invasive barberry and honeysuckle. And then how can we manage deer populations? When we talk about deer ticks, there's a reason they're called deer ticks. That is their by far and away preferred adult feeding host. And those deer ticks are how ticks move. That adult deer tick can be feeding on a deer, and that deer can be moving through a place, and that deer can fall off. And then once it gets in that space, it can lay a surprising number of eggs, up to 3,000 at one time. So let's take a look at somebody's backyard and how I would modify a backyard if this was me. One, when we think about placement of things, we can see that we have our edge habitat, our transition between our wooded and our backyard. Know that in a lot of cases, and I've been guilty of this in the past, we take that swing set and we stick it all the way up against that back end line there. We're putting it in prime tick habitat where the kids, our number one most impacted cohort here in Ohio for Lyme disease, are going to encounter a tick. So we want to make sure that we're siting that a little bit closer to the middle, out in the sun. The deer ticks are going to not like the sun, just like Risa said. That's going to have a lower percentage of them. Same with your vegetable garden. Plus, you want to keep it away from the shade anyhow if you want some vegetables. And then if we have a pathway that goes into the woods, maybe I'm going to widen it so that I'm staying away from some of those questing zones for ticks. I'm staying in the middle of the pathway where I'm going to have less of a chance of encountering them. So when we talk about modification, we have some tools in our toolbox that we can use as part of our IPM strategy. What we have found is if you do applications of acaricide, they're probably going to be better targeted to that zone where we see a bunch of ticks as opposed to just a widespread over there. Keep in mind, ticks will rapidly reestablish into a habitat, and there's been some research that's out there that even if you eliminate the bulk of them from an area, because it only takes one to give you Lyme disease, it doesn't tremendously decrease your chances of Lyme disease, and it might affect all the non-target arthropods, the beneficials as well. All right, let's talk about animals. Let's talk about specifically longhorn ticks and cattle. And Risa showed you a similar slide to this. This tick, with its parthenogenic reproduction, the ability of it to overwhelm an animal, has the potential to really negatively impact how we graze animals in Ohio and the United States. And animal agriculture is a huge component of our industry, our number one industry. So we know, because we have talked to producers and seen the effects, this tick can actually overwhelm full-grown animals, not just calves, in sheer numbers and cause mortality through blood feeding. But the disease that we have identified that it is competently able to vector or transmit here in the United States is Theileria orientalis, a protozoal organism that causes problems in cattle, things like anemia or decreased blood, inappetence, weakness, increased heart rates, respiratory rates, fever, jaundice, that icterus or yellow cover, open cows, abortion, and mortality. There is a test available. Your veterinarian can test. It's a paired test with anaplasmosis, and we'll talk about why getting that test is important if you're worried about mortality from this disease. And it's important to know, too, that there is no treatment or vaccine for Theileria. They need to recover on their own, and estimates for mortality in a herd could be up to 5% of cattle because they do have to get better on their own. And then when they improve, they would be an asymptomatic carrier. And when we worry about longhorn ticks and cattle, longhorn ticks are the arthropod vector of this disease, and they can share it through cows within a herd. Now, credit to Risa for this graphic right here. This was from a farm that was affected by large numbers of ticks that caused mortality in cattle. And when we first started seeing longhorn ticks here in Ohio, and we were seeing huge numbers of ticks on animals, we were seeing that in hot and humid summer and on tall grass. And so knowing where this tick comes from and the environment that it's in, we had assumed that this is a tick that we're really going to only have to worry about in the dead of summer and lots of humidity. But we have found, and ticks have shown, that they don't necessarily follow the literature. We had a April detection in 2023 on a farm in Gallia County, and then we broke that record with a March detection in Pike County. So as Risa showed, anytime it gets above a certain temperature, these ticks are going to emerge. They're going to look for a host, and they're going to want to start blood feeding. And it really drives home the point that our scouting or our awareness of when ticks are active really needs to expand and not be pegged necessarily to a season, but have a general understanding of how they behave instead. Now, if you're scouting for cattle, if you're scouting for longhorn ticks on cattle, the places that I find them the most is they really, really like the ears. They will be along the margin. They can be deep into the ear canal. They can be in tremendous number. And then another common place to look would be around the udder or the perineum or the tail head. But we have seen them in large numbers covering the entire animal. For early detection, I find that these are really their favorite places. And we know cattle producers don't work their animals by hand more than maybe a couple of times a year. But when you do get that opportunity to run them through the chute, I would make sure to take that opportunity to do a check on them in some of these places here where we will find the initial spots where the longhorn tick likes to establish. All right, so how do we control longhorn ticks in animals? We have a bunch of tools in our toolbox. So far, products that are labeled for ticks have proven to be effective, but keep in mind that these are part of your IPM strategy. We have products that are labeled for pasture control. Unfortunately, we're not really going to use them as our primary control method because any pesticide applied to pasture has to touch the tick. And if we're talking about that preferential habitat of tall grass, if we apply an acaricide to tall grass, it sits on the top and the tick's not being affected. And then if we mow that tall grass, the tick can be under the residue mat and it's not going to be affected as well. And then they can reintroduce themselves pretty rapidly in a space. It is pretty interesting to note that similar to how we saw in your backyard, edge habitat management in a pasture can be effective. If you can mow that 3 meters around the fence line on either side, that does a little bit of a good job keeping them from coming into the pasture. And then when we talk about applications on animals, we can we can use any number of different products, but it really depends on what animals we're dealing with. If we're looking at companion animals, we have lots of different things out there labeled for ticks. Companion animals have the best stuff, whether it's the drops or the collar or the pills. What we have found is not all of them are necessarily labeled yet, because when we talk about animals, the label generally just says ticks. But when we talk about companion animals like our dogs and cats, the label is applicable per species of tick. And since the longhorn tick is new-ish to Ohio, some of those labels might not be tested and vetted out that way. But if you have your veterinary client-patient relationship in place with your veterinarian, they are able to recommend that to you. For livestock, we have multiple options. They can be dips or pour-ons or ear tags, things like that. They have to be labeled for ticks. And one of the things I've been working with producers on is you're going to potentially be working with your animals in late spring, early summer for fly control. That's a great time to try some tick control, but you got to be a label reader because not every product that is labeled for flies has the strength enough to affect ticks. So make sure that if you're going to be working your animals and you're heading into that heavy tick season, that you're putting a product on that not only gets flies, but consider one that gets ticks as well. Now, ivermectin has some effectiveness against ectoparasites like ticks, but it is not labeled for ticks. So again, that is one that you would need a veterinary client-patient relationship in place in order to use that legally and safely. And anymore, I'm getting tons of questions about ticks and horses. And we we know that when we take horses out on a trail ride, in a lot of cases, we're going to trailer them up. We're going to move them out from where they were kept, maybe in the barn, and we're going to take them into woods, very commonly out in Appalachia or Southern Ohio. They're going to head into tick habitat. They're going to encounter potentially longhorn ticks. They're going to encounter deer ticks for sure. Horses can get Lyme disease. Humans, dogs, cats, and horses all get it. So consider a tick preventative product to apply to your horses. The good thing about horses compared to other livestock is the products that are labeled for horses generally have a much longer duration when they're applied because horses are not food animal and therefore don't have withdrawal and residue worries. Now, if you are a cattle producer and you have concerns that there might have been thyleria affecting your herd, causing mortality, thyleria, because it is a disease that is caused by a vector, has no vaccine, and has no treatment, might be eligible for the livestock indemnity program through FSA, but you have to have that positive test and you have to do it within a time period. But if you have concerns about that, I would make sure that you have a test from your veterinarian and then contact your FSA or your USDA person in your county. All right, now people, how do we keep the people safe? We need to use a personal protective sort of program or plan for ourselves. I'm a big fan of permethrin treated clothing. Permethrin is a pretty potent acaricide. You can treat your own clothing if you use a permethrin labeled for fabric, or you can purchase pre-treated clothing. It's pretty commonly found now. Lots of outfitters, stores, Tractor Supply, you can find them on Amazon. They will sell permethrin treated clothes. U.S. military has been treating our troops' uniforms for a long time with permethrin. Then I recommend topical repellents, and I have a list of them there. I don't recommend one over the next. There are so many out there that you really do need to be a label reader because they have different uses for different ages in different situations. The EPA has a great decision-making tool on a website that we have here at Ohio State called the Bite site, and you can find that at go.osu.edu/bite. I'll put that in the chat once we get a chance to start taking questions after this. And then for your person, knowledge is key. Whenever I'm out on a trail walk, and I still go out hiking, even though I know the dangers that are out there, I'm keeping to the middle of the trail. I'm not going off trail. And when I get back, I am doing a thorough tick check on me. I want to get them off me before they bite. I'm preferential with my permethrin treated clothes with long pants, long sleeves, light colors, trying to increase my chances of seeing them and knocking them off. Then I get home and I am going to throw those clothes in the washer. I'm going to take a shower to make sure that there's nothing embedding on me, because if you get them off before they embed, you can get them off before they become a problem. And then I recommend you definitely want to work with your vet to get your companion animals on the best product that you can fit in your budget, because dogs and cats are walking tick drags. They will just vacuum up ticks. And if they don't have something on them, then they're going to be bringing them back into the house and potentially causing further problems, plus all the diseases that affects dogs and cats that ticks can vector. Now, there's one right way to remove a tick, and then there's all the other ways. To remove a tick correctly, you want to use tweezers or a pointy tick tool, and you want to get all the way to that embedded head, which is cemented into the host. You want firm upward pressure to grasp that tick and pull it up so you get the entire head and embedded mouthpiece out. And then you wash your hands, you wash the site, and then you put that tick in a Ziploc bag and squirt a little hand sanitizer in the bag. Make sure that you are not using any of the other things that you might read about. Don't try to smother them with anything. Don't put a match on them. Don't grab them by their butt and try to yank them out. That headpiece is embedded in there and you'll just yank its butt out. And there's plenty of research that shows inappropriately removing a tick actually makes your chances of disease worse. All right, some take-home points. Tick diseases are prevention diseases. I do presentations and I try to make everybody in the room promise that they will never get bit by a tick for the rest of their life. Realize that you can encounter a tick in all 4 seasons in any habitat. We are constantly learning about them moving into new spaces. Know that they can vector bacterial, viral, or protozoal disease, but also induce a life-changing allergy in people. So you're going to need to make that personal plan for safety with permethrin-treated clothes, repellents, knowledge, working with your companion animals, familiarize yourself with the proper removal of that, and then we're going to talk about submitting ticks for testing here shortly. And on that note, I'm going to stop and turn it back over to Risa.
All right. So, we've had a lot of inquiries over the years about tick pathogen testing, and so we are pleased to share that we do now have a tick-borne pathogen testing service. This is a service that has a rapid turnaround time. Within 72 hours after we receive it, we can send a report. And we do have this service available called Buckeye Tick Test. Okay, so if you go to buckeyetickTest.osu.edu, that is where you can find our site, and it's very simple. You just place the tick in an envelope, place it place an order, and then place it in the mail. So this is what the site looks like. If you were to click place your order, we have a nice little graphic of instructions here, and there's a short order form. And importantly, we do ask a little bit of questions. If you know the answers to these questions, like about where you might have encountered this tick and some things like that, that is valuable to us because we do share all of this information with, well, we don't share your personal information. We share the information about where these ticks were found and what pathogens are in them with the Ohio Department of Health. But if you click on detailed services as well, you can read more about which different pathogens we screen for different ticks. So really importantly, we do not screen all ticks for the same things. So there are some labs out there that will, for example, screen American dog ticks for the agent of Lyme disease, but that tick cannot transmit the agent of Lyme disease to you. So we specifically designed these panels to be tick species specific. So for all of the common pathogens that lead to disease in people or pets. And again, our panels do include pathogens that are important only in veterinary medicine as well, because we care about the whole family, not just the people in the house. So this is a new service that is available to Ohioans. So we wanted to make sure we shared that with everyone today. And again, that is buckeyetickTest.osu.edu. Then I also want to share with y'all, if you have appreciated this information today and you're excited about the research that Ohio State is doing, you're excited about the Buckeye Tick Test, we are running a fundraising campaign right now where you can contribute to move the needle on ticks and tick-borne disease in Ohio. This can be found on the Ohio State University Buckeye Funder page, and there's a variety of different levels for contribution that people can make to help OSU understand more about ticks and tick-borne pathogens and prevent more disease for Ohioans. So I'm going to stop sharing that now. And we are going to go to questions at this point. So we've been answering some as we go along. And there was a couple that I thought we would answer live. So there was one question from Amy, who asked if you could have anaplasmosis and Lyme disease at the same time. And that's a great question, because yes, people can be infected with multiple tick-borne pathogens at a time. So ticks themselves can be co-infected. And there are examples of people who have been sick with multiple. In fact, I think one of the newsworthy headlines was, I think it was a man out of New York or New Jersey. He was infected with the agent of Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, and babesiosis all at the same time. So there are, I mean, that's pretty rare, but there are examples of people getting multiple tick-borne diseases.
And I would see similar things in animals in practice. It was not uncommon for me to see a dog come in with ticks on them and carry Ehrlichia and Rocky Mountain spotted fever at the same time. All right, we have a question about, I live on 17 wooded acres and my dog loves exploring the property. She's been treated with Frontline, but I'm wondering, does Frontline actually repel ticks, or can they still attach to her coat and potentially be brought into her house? So in practice, I said never say never and never say always. Frontline will kill ticks. It takes a little bit of time after application before it spreads completely over the dog, and then ticks are kind of hard to kill, so it doesn't kill them instantaneously. But it's important to note the tick doesn't want to leave the dog. It's going to hold on for dear life because that is its food source. So I would say it would be unlikely, but there is the potential of that.
Another person asked, do animals develop alpha-gal syndrome or just people? So as we know right now, only people, but this is still an evolving situation. As far as I know, there are no animal cases of alpha-gal syndrome.
So there is a question, and I'm going to let Lisa ask if there's different colors of tick eggs, because she stares at way more tick eggs than I do. I have not seen, there's a question, has tick saliva been used in pharmacology to create anti-inflammatory medications? I am not aware of any research in that, but it would not surprise me. I will say that they are starting to study things like tick saliva and all of the enzymes that are in that to try to figure out how to use those components against the tick. They have a pretty robust array of enzymes in them, and that actually makes it challenging for us to address how we get rid of them because they have such redundancy in their enzymes.
I was muted. Sorry. So Tim, you punted the different colors of tick egg question to me. So
That's you, buddy.
um, they're very generally similar in color. There's some variation, but they're all kind of like amberish of the tick species that we're talking about now. They're all kind of an amberish, kind of translucent color, generally speaking. So kind of yes, they're all the same and maybe a very slight variation from there.
All right. We got some cattle
Yeah.
questions. We'll jump into a couple of cattle questions. Is there anything to spray on the tick area that is safe for livestock? So any product that we are going to use, we are legally bound by federal law to read, understand, and follow the label. So there would be some sprays that you would put on pasture that could potentially cause problems with cattle if they were to graze them outside of following the recommendations for reintroduction of the cattle into that space. So always remember to read, understand, and follow the label because the label is the law.
All right, we have a question about if cattle are infected by the ticks, are they a problem for human consumption? So this is also a question I get about deer and other things. So in terms of human consumption and risk, there is no tick-borne pathogen, in that host that is a risk for consumption by you. So like you can eat a deer that had been covered in ticks. You could eat a cow that had ticks on them without risk of transmission. The pathogens we're talking about have to be transmitted by the bite of a tick.
So one thing to note, we have a number of questions that are in here that are personal medical questions. We are not able to give medical guidance on there. So if you are wondering if why we're not specifically asking if you can take doxycycline or anything like that, that is not anything we are allowed to do.
So another person had a question about how quickly a virus is transmitted once a tick attaches. So bacteria can take some hours to days, depending on the bacteria, but viruses do typically transmit faster. So for example, Powassan virus can transmit in quickly as 15 minutes.
Okay. Ah, here's one of my favorites. Do possums eat ticks? And there was a study that came out a long time ago that they thought that possums were preferential predators of ticks, and that study was unfortunately debunked. They might eat the occasional tick, but they're not tick vacuums like we were hoping they would be. What we have found is, unfortunately, there is not really an apex predator that is taking care of ticks for us. And boy, if we could find one, that would be a great thing.
So we have a question, are permethrin and these other topicals considered safe? Are there any well-tested natural alternatives? So yes, they are considered safe, but yes, there are also plant-based alternatives. So I always say that whatever your lifestyle is, there is a product for you. So my favorite, the EPA has this tool. It's called Find the Repellent That's Right for You. And so you can look that up, and they have like a little short questionnaire that says, what are you trying to protect from? How long do you want to reapply and things? And you can look at that. So there are products like oil of lemon eucalyptus, the commercial like extraction process, high concentration type, not an essential oil, but you can buy in a spray this plant-based product as an alternative. And there's a lot of products. So, if you're a person who doesn't like the smell of DEET or the feel of it, then maybe you'll like picaridin. Maybe you'll like the oil of lemon eucalyptus, or there's a laundry list of products. And some of them you would have to apply just more frequently, like they wouldn't give you 8 hours of protection, they'd only give you 4. But I promise you that whatever your lifestyle, there is a repellent that's right for you. You can be tick safe.
We've had multiple questions about will this be recorded and shared? And yes, this will be recorded and shared out widely. So don't you worry about that. And all right. So one question, does the percentage of DEET matter? Again, that is a label question that is on there, it will matter. Ticks are harder to kill than other things. So just because you see something that might say insect repellent or something like that, that does not mean it is effective against ticks. You'll see commonly things that might have a mosquito on it, and it will be effective against a mosquito, which is much easier to address than a tick. So make sure that you are reading the label and following that label carefully.
We had a question about how soon will they have a human vaccine for protection? I'm going to assume that this is a question about Lyme disease specifically. And the answer is pretty soon. My understanding was that based on the progress through clinical trials, that we might see a Lyme vaccine as soon as 2026. But that was the last that I heard. So supposedly a new vaccine is coming.
We have a question, is there a fact sheet regarding children and ticks? And we are actually working on that, me and Risa and a colleague, and we should have something out there because we want to make sure that we have information that we can share for kiddos that is more kid friendly. And we also found, Risa found that the CDC has a really cool one pager that is like a cartoon that we can send in the materials and the follow-up as well that it really gets in front of kiddos as well. All right, and we probably are not going to get to all of them in our time because we have 25 more questions and more are coming in. I want to make sure that we address some of the ones that I consider really critical. So here's one that I've read that permethrin is not safe for cats. Permethrin is toxic to cats. And so if I was treating my clothes, which I do, and I have cats, which I do, I'm going to take them outside and I'm going to treat them in the garage and I'm going to wait till they're fully dried before I would bring them into the house because I don't want the cats to have any contact with that permethrin because it can cause neurologic disease. Oop, and I saw that Risa wanted to answer that. Sorry about that, Risa. One of the questions at the top are the wrist preventative bug repellents that work against ticks. And I don't know what your thoughts are about them. I would say they're not my favorite. And keep in mind, they might have more effectiveness at repelling mosquitoes, and ticks are a whole different beast in terms of that. But I've not seen great research on the wrist repellents effectivity.
So I think there's a couple questions about kind of tick removal tools. So this one, I saw one about maybe a tick tornado was the name or tickies. And do we have recommendations about tick removal? And my general take on tick removal tools is if it quickly gets the tick off of you and removes, the whole tick cleanly, then that's an excellent tool to continue using. So, I usually use tweezers, but there are a variety of products out there now that are, like a tick key of any kind. And the goal is just to get the tick out as quickly as possible. And so if you found a tool that can help you do that, then it's good to use.
Okay, we have a number of questions in there about topicals and DEETs, picaridins on any number of different species. Again, all of the products that you are going to use for topical application on yourself or treating permethrin treated clothes or applications to animals or applications to pasture are going to have label guidelines on how to use it, when to use it, how long it works, what personal protective equipment you need to wear when you apply it. And that is federal law that you are required to follow. And if you follow that effectively, you're going to be not just compliant, but you're going to be applying it in a safe and effective manner.
So there was a question about if you find ticks on clothing in the woods, what's the best way to remove them before animals greet you? Or if they bite you. Great. So I love to carry lint rollers around. It's extra helpful since I also have a bunch of animals and I always have pet hair on me. But lint rollers are your friend for getting ticks off. So I like to do that on clothing. But so I do that before I get in my car. I also have permethrin treated clothes and things too, but anytime if you see ticks crawling on you or you concerned that you might have ticks on your clothing, you can do that to clothing and gear. But what I do is when I get home, I strip that clothes and I throw it in the dryer for about 10 or 15 minutes. So typically what kills ticks is desiccation or drying out, dehydrating. So you can kill ticks by doing that. You can also put those in a bag and put them in the freezer. If putting them in your dryer with potentially live ticks is concerning to you, you can also freeze them. So that's two ways if you suspect that they're on gear and clothing that you can kill them without worry of bringing them in the house.
We have a question about goats and ticks. Any info if some of the cattle-borne diseases have jumped species yet? We talked about Thyleria orientalis in cattle, and actually that is a disease that while it doesn't affect sheep, can be inside sheep and they can carry it as an asymptomatic carrier state. But that does mean that if you have ticks on your sheep and you're co-grazing them with cattle and they would then bite your cattle, you could have transmission into your cattle herd that way.
All right, and then I see a comment slash question, and I agree. So Tim, you were talking about ivermectin use with large animals, and the internet cut out for a second. So this person was asking if you could reiterate what your recommendation was about ivermectin use with large animals regarding ticks about horses.
Certainly. So ivermectin has shown to be effective against ticks, but it is not labeled for use for tick control. So if you were to use it, you would have to be using it by a veterinary recommendation from a veterinarian where you have a veterinary client-patient relationship. I wouldn't just pull it off the shelf in the barn and stick your animal in there. I know that we have plenty of effective topical applications for horses that would actually last longer than ivermectin would.
We have a question about, I think there's a couple in here about where ticks lay eggs and then if you find a nest. So generally ticks, again, they're going to be in the habitat that they like to be in. So black-legged tick, those adult females, after they fed on, like, let's say a deer, they're going to drop off. And so probably in the same wooded habitat, and they're going to lay their eggs, and it's going to be in a little cluster. There's no nest. And I have never seen tick eggs out in nature. Like, you're not going to see them to eliminate them generally. So they are there. It's wherever the ticks drop is where they're going to lay eggs. So an important thing, and this question brought it up, that we didn't really talk about was that ticks don't move very far on their own. So the black-legged tick that causes Lyme disease may never move more than 3 meters, 9 feet on its own in its entire life. So it has a short kind of home range, if you will, of looking for that host. And then the rest of the time, it's going to move to new places on a host. Some of our tick species will move further than that, like the Lone Star tick could move 20 plus meters, so a lot further, but they're generally not going far to like some preferred space to lay eggs. I think we have a couple questions in here about landscape treatments. So I see tick tubes, and someone else was asking about treating lawns and are these things effective? And this is a great question that is unfortunately not straightforward, easy to answer. So my lab is doing research right now about how effective are these things, and some data suggests that they can be very effective. Others suggest that it's less effective, and the question is, is it because of the local ecology of like the different hosts that these ticks are using are different? Is it because the different like backyards that people have in different parts of the country are very different, right? So there's a lot to the ecology of this that can render those things effective or not effective. Importantly, if you're putting out, if you're like have a lawn application, the way those products work is the tick has to become in contact with the product, right? And ticks are generally hiding in leaf litter and things, or in vegetation. And most of these products might be sprayed and laid on top of that substrate, on top of that vegetation. So it can work on any ticks that come in contact with it initially, but any new ticks that were brought in by hosts or, were hiding and came out may not, be come in contact with the product. 'Cause the product has a short lifespan. The tick tubes can work in some cases, in that the idea is that the mouse is going to come and pull the tick tube bedding out and use it, and prevent ticks on it. And so it's a question of, that mouse's behavior, density of mice in your area, alternative resources they have. So if you're having a serious problem with ticks in your yard, and first of all, be using all of the preventives that you can for people and pets, and then you could consider using some of these other options, but just know that you could have mixed results.
Are there topical treatments that are safe for use on both dogs and humans? There's really no crossover on products between dogs and humans. They're going to have completely different labels. DEET and picaridin are topical for application on human skin, and that's what their labels are going to be. I would not be using any of those products on my dog or my cat, and they're not legally allowed to be used based on the label on a dog or a cat.
Okay, someone has a question about the proper disposal of ticks, which brings up another great point. So generally, if you are bitten by a tick, you should save it. You should save that tick until you know what the identity of that species is. So again, these different ticks can transmit different pathogens. So knowing what species bit you is really important to be able to tell your doctor, because a lot of these symptoms present the same. And if they know which species it is, it helps narrow down that differential diagnosis. So you should be getting that tick identified. There are a number of ways to do that. So generally, to save the tick, you can save it in a little baggie. You could save it in a small little jar. Some people use old pill jars. You could save it. Some people put hand sanitizer on it. You put it in the freezer. There's a variety of ways to save that tick for ID. After it's been killed in one of those mechanisms, so either frozen or in hand sanitizer, or if you leave it in a bag for a long time, it's going to die in there because it's going to dehydrate. Any of those methods after that, they can go in the trash or flush down the toilet. But hopefully you will have it ID'd and potentially consider testing.
Couple questions about tick preventatives for canine and companion animal. How effective are flea, tick, heartworm pills? Pretty darn effective. I would say companion animals by far and away have the best options for ticks. And so I would definitely, and this gets to the second question, is prescription tick prevention for pets better than non-prescription? That gets a little tricky because there are some very effective products that, because they're no longer patented, they are not prescription anymore. But most of the newest stuff that has the fastest knockdown and the longest duration are prescription. So you can, again, going back to what I said before, work with your veterinarian to figure out what is the best product for use in your pet and your situation. It might be a pill, it might be the drops, it might be a collar, something like that.
Okay, we have a couple questions. So one question here about do we do tick prevention workshops for vulnerable human populations? Where would we go to get one? So if you are, a member of a community that would like to have a tick talk done in that community, do reach out to us or to OSU, also your local health department. We will find a way to make sure that you're connected with someone who can do a TikTok. Sometimes that's us. Sometimes, again, it's your local health department. Sometimes there are other groups that we partner with, but we do regularly help with education in the state.
Yeah, I provide a tick presentation to extension educators in all 88 counties. So contact your local extension office as well.
Mhm.
And I think we could be here for 100 years answering tick questions. So maybe we pick one each, and then we will get this finished out and let Nikki close this down. We can provide our emails in the follow-up in case we have some questions pop up after time, and you're going to we can put some other information, the link to the lab and to the bite site and to various handouts and fact sheets as well.
All right, I'm going to pick how long in the freezer do they need to go. So generally a couple hours in the freezer is enough to kill ticks. So on your clothing or in a Ziploc bag. Just a couple hours is all you need, but I always kind of like say overnight is even better.
Okay, and I'm going to say, do ticks like wildflowers? We are planting a wildflower field in our front yard. It has lots of sun and not much shade. So when I showed you that model where it had 2% were located in the middle of the yard and about 82% or so is in the edge habitat, about 9% of ticks are in ornamentals. So while it's a tinier chance, it's not a zero chance. And if you got lots of sun and not much shade, they don't like lots of sun and not much shade, so that might be helpful as well.
All right. Well, I agree. There's a lot. We could continue talking about ticks, but this has been really great. There was try to answer a couple questions in the chat before I sign off, but we're gonna have to get going here. I got to pick up the kiddos. But thank you everyone for attending today, and we hope that you felt this was useful, and we really appreciate your time and attention.
Thanks, everybody.